Are you curious about Gestalt language processing? You are not alone. Join me, Corinne Smoose, and speech therapy PD for our podcast, The Gestalt Get Together. Our episodes try to balance the enthusiasm and excitement about GLP and its associated intervention ideas, as well as a healthy dose of skepticism about how to understand and integrate this paradigm shift into your career and the field at large. We hope that you can get together with us to learn more about Gestalts.
Welcome to the School of Speech podcast, presented by SpeechTherapyPD.com. School of Speech is designed specifically for the school-based SLP to come together to discuss current topics, tackle difficult situations, and share our insights. Our goal is to bolster confidence, celebrate our triumphs, and foster a community dedicated to the excellence in the school setting.
Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Carolyn Dolby and I am your SpeechTherapyPD.com podcast host for School of Speech. School of Speech is designed for all of us school-based clinicians to come together to we're going to talk about current trends, share our insights, and really champion our expertise. Our goal is to bolster our confidence, celebrate our triumphs, and we want to foster a community that is we are all dedicated to the excellence in the school setting. I'm super excited for today's episode. It is titled The Monolingual SLP's Guide to Multilingual Speech Sound Disorders. Yeah, that's a mouthful for me. So I'm super excited to have Dr. Raul Prezas here to navigate our exploration of multilingual sound disorders. What we are going to discover tonight is how to utilize interpreters in order to differentiate between speech sound differences versus disorders, and how to implement culturally responsive, evidence-based interventions so we can really be supporting our multilingual students. So as we start settling in for a great episode, I do have a little bit of housekeeping. Just so everyone knows, each of our episodes run for 60 minutes and are offered for ASHA CEUs, 0.1 ASHA CEUs. All right, so financial disclosures for Raul. He is a full salaried, full-time employee at Lamar University, and he is also receiving an honorarium for his participation in tonight's episode. For non-financial, Raul is a member of ASHA and TISHA. And guess what? Me too. I do receive a salary. I've just recently moved and I receive a salary now at Portland Public. I also continue to teach a graduate course at University of Houston. And I also consult with school districts around the nation supporting program development for their dysphagia programs and staff training. And I also receive compensation from SpeechTherapyPD.com for hosting School of Speech, my dream job. And non-financial, I'm also a member of TISHA. I'm on their task force for swallowing and feeding, and I also volunteer for Feeding Matters. But you know what? We don't need to know about me. We need to know about Raul. So Dr. Perez, let me tell you about him. He's an associate professor at Lamar University. He has over 17 plus years servicing culturally and linguistic diverse populations in both home health, public school settings, as well as in higher education. His interests include speech sound disorders, why we're here, phonological development, bilingual and multilingual assessment and treatment, school-based issues, and working with underrepresented populations. In addition to that, He has publications in journals. He has written several chapters in books and also articles related to this topic. He served as the international expert on the international expert panel on multilingual children's speech. They were establishing speech sound screening tools and guidelines. He has served on ASHA's Continuing Education Board, as well as on their Leadership Cultivation Committee. Dr. Prezas has served as topic chair for ASHA's Speech Sound Disorders Convention and for their program committee. That's not enough. Let me tell you what he's doing currently. He is working on phonological treatment modules for pattern-oriented approaches for speakers of other languages. He is also the co-author of a book dedicated to helping first-generation college students to succeed during their undergraduate experiences, and does interprofessional collaborative research in sociology. Dr. Prezas has been invited to present his research and share his experiences at numerous workshops, webinars, and conventions. And now he is here with us. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Welcome, Dr. Prezas. How are you?
Hi, Carolyn. Thank you so much. I'm doing well. How are you?
Oh my gosh, I have been looking forward for today all day. So excited. So we are so glad you're here because you are going to walk away with a toolbox full of strategies to use. But before we get started, I'm always so curious about people's journeys. And I want to know your journey, like full stop, like what is your journey? How did you become and why did you become a speech language pathologist?
Well, it's interesting because I didn't really know much about our field for a long time. I started in music, vocal performance at Trinity University in San Antonio many years ago. And then I went to the University of Colorado at Boulder and studied music in a master's program. During my first year, I started developing vocal problems due to many different things like over practicing and other kinds of issues that came up. And so I went and visited with an ENT, and I learned more about our profession due to the fact that I found out that I had mild muscle tension dysphonia and pre-nodules, which was really kind of like a surprise at the time. You think that you see your career ahead of you going one way, and then it's sort of like something comes out of left field and just kind of takes you by surprise. And so I moved to Kansas for family reasons, and Wichita State University was the closest university to where I lived. It was about an hour away. During that time, one of the first faculty members that I met was Barbara Hodson in the cycles approach. And so she walked me through the program. She was very gracious, and I had the benefit of studying with her for my master's and my PhD there at Wichita State University. And I've been very grateful to have that connection with her. Through that process, we've developed lots of different things together, including an informal assessment for Spanish speakers. We've also looked at bilingual cycles approaches, and that's what led me into my current interests in multilingual approaches.
Whoa, wow. Talk about coming from it, like seriously, naturally. The fact that you needed the help just brought you to this profession. And now look at what you're doing. You're amazing. We are so lucky that you're here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm saying it's so exciting. So where do you want to start? What do you want to start with?
We can start with some of the resources at first that are at our disposal out there. I can talk a little bit also about difference versus disorder and what kind of got me interested in that as well from my own personal perspective, if you like.
You know what? Okay, for me, just because I'm going to say that I want everything. So let's start with difference versus disorder. I feel like that might be our foundation, and then the resources to help us build on that maybe.
Definitely. So from my own personal background of being bilingual myself, growing up in a simultaneous bilingual household, my grandmother, my abuelita, lived with us, and she only spoke Spanish. And then my parents spoke both languages, but they decided to speak English primarily growing up. I went to school back in the 80s in Texas when we didn't really have dual language programs. It was just go learn English, and that was the expectation. And during that time, I encountered my own interesting sort of experiences from other people. One of the things that I remember growing up was I thought the word for cereal was postostis. Post Toasties was that company that made all of those different brands of cereals back in the day. And so I'll never forget going to the cafeteria for the first time, getting breakfast in the line, and I asked for Post Toasties, and the cafeteria lady kind of looked at me like, well, we have these cereals here. And it was just sort of that interesting sort of moment where it wasn't quite right. There was something going on. I didn't know what it was, but I'll never forget that moment. And so when I think about difference versus disorder, and I think about our bilingual students that we're working with, being flexible, we have these standardized tests that expect us to answer a question a particular way, right? And they can only answer this answer or this other possible answer that they can choose. And I think being flexible is really important, understanding that the life perspective of the bilingual child is going to involve several different factors. They're going to have different dialects. They might come from a bidialectal household, bilingual household as well, multilingual, different levels, different print awareness experiences, different levels of language input. And I always go back to this other experience that I had. As you know, in Texas, we have during Easter cascarones, which are those egg shells filled with confetti, different colors. And I love that analogy because I was doing charades one time with my in-laws many, many years ago. And I thought for sure it was Easter. I thought it was the perfect moment. It was my turn. I'm just going to do cascarones. I'm going to pretend like I'm cracking an egg over my head and the confetti's getting everywhere. And they're going to immediately guess cascarones. Well, I spent 2 minutes trying to tell them what it was, and they were saying egg shell or egg cracking, egg yolk falling on your face. Like they had no idea what that was. And I think about our beautifully different multilingual, multicultural children who have these very wonderful experiences that maybe we're not aware of, these wonderful kind of cultural things that really sort of speak to their stories. And the more we ask the right kind of questions, I think the better we can get at truly understanding and getting to the heart of their needs in speech and language. I think that's really critical. So for difference and disorder, for me, it's being flexible, doing more informal assessments, asking questions like, what did you mean by that? Why did you answer that question that particular way? Can you tell me more? Can you describe a banana, for example? I had a kiddo who saw a picture of a yellow banana, very thin, very skinny banana, and they didn't know, or they didn't say the word banana. And I looked at them a little bit. I pulled it aside. We do dynamic assessment, right? Which is where we check to see whether it's a situation where they just need more time to learn. Like, is it a learning kind of thing? Can they learn, or is it truly like a disorder? And so that's why you do that real short 10, 15-minute window of test, mediated learning experience, and then a post-test to see if they can learn in that short amount of time. And so when I stopped and I said, can you tell me what a banana looks like? And the child looks at me and says, well, they're brown, right? Those plantains that are a little bit larger, and they describe the larger plantain, brown. And I thought, well, this child knows banana. They just don't recognize this particular picture of what that looks like. It was an illustration. It wasn't an actual photo of a banana, to be sure, in this particular thing. But those kinds of things, I think, can occur. So it's being able to look at conceptual scoring, look at the strengths and weaknesses of both languages together, and testing in both languages. I will say that I get a lot of questions about the language dominance tests. I get SLPs that say, well, my school district says if they do a language dominance test and Spanish is lower and English is more proficient, right, that in that case, they don't test in the native language. To which I say, be very careful, because our evaluations, right, they're a living document in a sense. And if it turns into a situation where the case becomes litigious, that in that courtroom, that judge is going to say, what does it say in the evaluation report? What did you actually do? And if you say, well, I have these notes over here, they're going to say, well, no, tell me what it says in the eval report that you wrote. And so I think it's really important that even if there's, they speak Spanish at home, but the child's not really speaking Spanish, let's get a bilingual person in there to, at least for 30 minutes even, attempt. I love the word attempt. We attempt
Okay.
Spanish language testing, right? And then we try to determine if their child can do the formal test or the informal test. And a lot of times we'll speak to them in Spanish and the child will say, huh, what? What was that? And it's obvious that they don't speak Spanish, but you've gone in, right? And you have clearly made the case that we did attempt it, that we tried several different stimuli and the child was not responsive in the Spanish language. Therefore, Spanish language testing was terminated, basically. So I think just sort of like those intuitive things that we all have as clinicians, if it doesn't feel quite right and you feel like you should be doing something different, definitely do that. And IDEA gives us a lot of great information, but when it comes to assessments in the native language, there's this one little line that IDEA says, and
I
it
leaned in.
says,
I literally leaned into this. Yeah.
what's that?
I was like leaning in, ready for this.
Oh,
Give me the
okay,
line.
yes. So it says that we should do assessments in the native language, right? And then, quote, unless it's clearly not feasible to so provide or administer. That is their little blurb, which gives a little bit of wiggle room. But what does that mean? What is feasible, right? And now we have to tease out the terminology. So what I tell clinicians when I'm talking in different modalities is I tell them, do what you feel is right and give it your good best effort. If you can't reach an interpreter by phone, try again. Don't just say, okay, well, I couldn't get an interpreter, it's due tomorrow, and ain't nobody got time for that kind of thing, right? Like we just have to make sure that we build in time for that good faith attempt to make sure that child gets the best possible evaluation that they can.
I like the term that you just used, good faith,
Yeah,
because also I think when we go back to planning the eval, maybe one of the first steps is doing that case history to see if there's another language.
exactly right. Yes, doing the case history, checking the survey. I will say that a lot of families are sometimes apprehensive about sharing language on the surveys in some cases for fears that their child might be automatically put in a particular pile, that we're going to put them in this pile that we're going to label them as needing this particular service. And so if there is a that's something to definitely think about, and so if we can just get creative to ask the right kinds of questions, check with individuals, and I know we'll talk about interpreters here in a minute, but just also getting somebody who speaks the native language to check in and to make a phone call. It can be the bilingual teacher. Now we have great programs in dual language with not only Spanish, but even in Texas, we have Vietnamese dual language programs. And I know across the country, there are several large metropolitan areas that have great dual language programs for children. And working with the teachers, working with the para-educators, professionals, I've had SLPs tell me, you know what, the only person I had on campus was the cafeteria worker that I'm friends with. And I said, well, that to me sounds like it's a good faith attempt to get that person in. But if you do use a volunteer or somebody that is sort of outside of the immediate group within the IEP, definitely with approval, right, from the family and from administration, for sure.
Absolutely. I like that because when we're talking about being culturally responsive and respectful, right? Getting that approval from the family and letting them know what we're doing. I like that.
Right. Definitely.
Yeah. And I think it was you gave me a minute to pause when you said that sometimes parents, when you send that survey home, might be apprehensive. And I think we kind of need to hear that, because wouldn't dawn on me out the gate that maybe they would not want to say something because they don't want it to be swayed one way or the other. Right? Wow. That was
Definitely.
And I liked also earlier you said everyone has a different life perspective.
Yes.
I kind of want I want more on that, because
I can give you more.
yeah, give me more, because I was like, let's go there.
Yes, for sure. So I've done a lot of intercollaborative work in sociology and also within our field, the scope of practice, we have the multi-perspective identity. And all of us have a multi-perspective identity. And when I talk to my graduate students, undergraduate students at Lamar University, for example, we discuss this notion of all of us have culture. And I will say, with love, my white students are like, well, what about me? Well, of course you have culture. Everyone has culture. We all have this background. We all come from different regions. We all come from a different family makeup. And we have these additional things that make us who we are: veteran status, ability, disability. If you're a type 1 diabetic, for example, or if you're a parent, that is a perspective. If you're a foster parent, adoptive parent, that's another perspective. SCS, religion, age, gender, for example, sexual orientation, all of those things are these wonderful perspectives that we bring to the table. And the interesting thing is when I have these discussions with my students, they start to see these similarities emerge, even if it's something different. Like one student is this category, this other student in this other category. They come to the table with these stories of sometimes discrimination or hurdles, right, barriers, and they start to realize that we're all going through something. And our parents, are the families that we're working with, also are going through something. And a lot of times it's those language barriers in some cases. And so what can we do as professionals to make them feel comfortable, to make them feel welcome? A lot of times I tell my monolingual SLPs or like if you're bilingual, multilingual, but you don't speak the language of the family you're working with, learning a couple of words like hello and goodbye in the native language, just to connect a little bit more, right, with the families.
Little effort,
Yeah,
huge.
it goes a
That's
long way.
wow. Yeah. And the thing about perspective, I know I hate that I'm going to call my mom out on this, but one thing that I've had to shape my mother's behavior, because she will often say, "Ah, that's just common knowledge."
Mm.
And I say, Mom, no, that is common in your culture, in what you know in your experience. So to you, everyone should know that, but not everybody
Yeah,
knows everything.
everyone should know cascarones, right? I mean,
That's immediately what I was thinking about. Because when my mom is like, how do they not know? That's everybody does that. No, it's not like that. Yeah. So I think ev that is powerful for us to realize that nothing's common. And I
mhm,
really like the fact that you're pointing out that everyone has culture.
mhm,
Culture isn't everybody else. We also
right.
have our own, and we need to think about what are our cultural biases on our own culture, mother, my mother meaning, and what are our beliefs, and what are our expectations that people should know, because not everybody has that same experience, especially coming not only from culture. When we're not talking about race necessarily. We're not talking about color, and we're talking about all of it, your whole life,
Mhm.
and how you were raised, and your belief systems and religion, all that you listed. The umbrella is huge.
And it changes over time. The dynamic systems theory, the idea that you could go to France tomorrow and start learning French, and it becomes part of who you are as well. So it's this ongoing, very organic thing that happens in life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my question would be, my first question is, okay, so if you are about to do, so we're an SLP, we're about to do
Mhm.
our evaluation, and we read, and this student is new to us. Let's say it's an initial, we don't know the student, and we see, oh, this student comes from a bilingual family. Any language is uh, German. I mean, whatever, because I'm also from Texas, but I'm in Portland now. But, Spanish is an easy one for us in Texas. But let's say German. What do we need to do? What's our first step?
Well, the first thing to do is not to cry. I always tell my students, it's so funny. I tell them, what are you going to do in this situation? But don't say cry.
I love it.
But so what we would do is initial research, right, on if we're not familiar with German. So this idea of cultural humility and cultural competence, right, that we have that it's within the last few years, a couple decades, cultural competence tells us we should do some background knowledge prior to working with a child, and look for resources to help us understand German and English and how they come together. So, for example, German doesn't have the W sound. So that's one example. So we wouldn't expect a child to have that sort of crossover of W. But there's other sounds that German and English share, like the P, the B, the M sound, PTK, for example, in the final position, stridency, S clusters, liquid L, and then we have the unshared sounds. And so if we're talking about a speech sound evaluation in this case, I would find information on German and English and how they intersect. What are the shared sounds? What are the unshared sounds? And then I would, and in order to do that, I know I have a lot of resources I can share, but
Wait a minute, you're making me cry because you just blah, 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 blah. I went, I don't know where to start. Where did you,
so
how?
bilinguistic, Ellen Kester, who's based out of Austin, she has done some great work on the shared versus unshared sounds. And she has a book that came out in 2014 that's a good launching pad for those shared versus unshared sounds. And their website, bilinguistics.com, on that website, they feature some of those things. ASHA has a website that also talks about shared versus unshared sounds as well. And so you can find it online and get that information. And then what I would recommend also is to look for an interpreter. There we go. Thank you for posting.
Yep,
Yeah, bilinguistics.com is
put that
great.
in the, yeah.
That's wonderful. And so they have a lot of good information. Also with dynamic assessment, they do a great job of like walking you through, like these are some examples of what you can do for dynamic assessment for children. Liz Benya has great resources as
Yes.
well. She's just has done great work. And her website is the Two Languages, Two Worlds. And that's also a free resource. Two
Ooh.
Languages, Two Worlds.
Is that spelled out or the numbers?
I think it's the number, if I remember correctly. So Two Languages, Two Worlds, and they have blogs on there. Brian Goldstein has contributed, and other notable researchers in bilingual assessment and intervention. And I always get questions about, well, what if the family doesn't want to speak their native language at home for fears of confusing the child, right?
Yeah.
Or like, what if the school district says only have the family speak to the child in English so that we don't confuse them? Even with cognitive impairment, it can only exacerbate it, yada, 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 that whole story, that whole scenario that we always hear. And they've done some great work at dispelling the notion that we should only speak in one language. So still having the family speak in the native language, which is common sense, right? Like your mother would say.
I know. She'd say that's common sense.
Yes, and so, but it's almost 2025, and I'm still saying that in my presentations when I speak with SLPs and teachers and other professionals. Even if the child has a disorder, even if they have cognitive impairment, getting that very structured, rule-based language input is so critical. So rather than broken English, having a beautiful Spanish, Vietnamese, Hmong, native language input is critical for that child.
If nothing else, I want everyone to hear what you just said, because we are all striving to be culturally and responsible clinicians and honoring that the home language, the heritage language.
The heritage, yes, exactly.
And what a great way to start that bolstering of the relationship with the family by honoring their language, and that that's heavy. I like that.
And I tell people too, because I have kids, I fostered and adopted 4 children. And then my husband and I, we're in our second marriages, and he has 4 children as well. So we have 8 kids together, and they're 18 to 30. So they're adults, they're adulting, which is nice also. But we're expecting our first grandchild next March, which is going to be amazing. We can't wait.
Wow, well, congrats.
Well, thank you.
love
Thank
it.
you. And so, yeah, so I think that definitely making sure that we honor the family's perspectives, honor the languages, and make sure that we're following those models. But that Two Languages, Two Worlds is a great resource. And it gives good data, articles as well, backup data in case you have a colleague who is challenging that notion of only speaking in one language. So it's good stuff.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I am really interested about interpreters, translators, because I'm monolingual. And so what do I need to know because I mean, the best would be you speak the language, and
Mhm.
that's not going to, for me, that's not going to happen with a child that has a dual languages or multi-languages. What do I need to think about? Because I'm going to need a translator or an interpreter.
The first thing I would tell you that you need to know is that you are trying your best, and the fact that you're asking that question is where it starts. That's the most important thing you can do, is ask that question. And I recently presented at a conference in Pennsylvania, and I was sharing that, we're doing the best that we can. I was sharing this with the monolingual SLPs that I was talking to, and I had one attendee type a comment to me in the chat box. It was very similar to this kind of setup that we have here tonight. And they just sent this to me privately. And I just want to read to you verbatim what they said regarding that before I answer. I mean, I'm answering your question, but
No,
I want to give
yeah,
you the
please
backup.
do.
Yeah. So they said, in the age of being quick to judge other SLPs, it is all over social media. I appreciate that you often say you are doing the best you can and accept that we are all here to do better. It gives me a sense that I'm doing okay and excites me to learn more.
I love that. And I need to hear that because we do, as SLPs, we want to do the best. And, I'm scared I'm going to either over identify or under identify or do it wrong, you
Mhm.
know? Yeah, thank you for sharing. We need to
Yes,
hear
of
that.
course.
We
I
all
think we
need to
all
hear
need to
that.
hear that. Yes, we wear so many hats in our profession, and we have
Mhm.
to know everything about this and everything about that and everything about this, and it's changing. I will say that historically, we've been on a journey with multilingual assessment, but we're
For
getting
sure.
better. From 2007, we weren't talking about dynamic assessment very much in surveys that were posted, data-driven surveys. And then with the Arias and Freiberg study that came out in 2017, dynamic assessment was asked about, and people were doing it. So that to me shows growth over time. And the best thing we can do is just continue to grow and
Mhm.
continue to try our best to learn more and get better.
So I do know, most of us those of us, we're all in the schools, and they always want us to do a standardized test.
Mhm.
How can we do that when the standardized test is not normed on a bilingual, multilingual speaker?
And when we have 455 plus languages in the United
Right?
States other than English, how are you going to be able to do all of that?
Yeah.
I understand, like, when it comes to insurance purposes for home health or other kinds of private services to get that standardized assessment, or they always talk about also the age equivalence and things like that. But I really think that we have to dispel the notion that we need to use a standardized test. That informal
Amen.
is just as good, if not better. I get more from my informal assessments than I do from standardized tests. So for speech sound disorders, what I do is I love using 4 pictures. And the pictures come from Simon's Evaluating Communicative Competence. This was a resource that came out in the 90s, but it's just 4 pictures, and it's a story of a girl watching TV, and her dog is sleeping behind the chair, and she reaches for a cookie, and she accidentally knocks the bowl of cookies on the floor. And then she says, "Oh my goodness, how clumsy of me." And the dog wakes up, and she goes to the kitchen, gets a broom and a dustpan. Can you tell I've done this many times in evals? And then while she's gone, the dog eats all the cookies. And when she comes back, the cookies are gone, and she doesn't see the dog smiling behind the chair because he's happy that his tummy is full of all the cookies. And I tell this story in English and Spanish, or the other language, with an interpreter. And we just get a brief conversation sample just to see if they're understandable in both languages. And then from that, you can get phonemes, you can get, an understanding of their overall intelligibility, right? And so then that, with a combination of what we have in English, which very classic 1988, it was Copeland and Gleason that came out with those intelligibility norms of like parent survey. And it's like at 2 years of age, they should be 50% intelligible, which I always tell people 5 out of every 10 words. At 3 years of age, they should be 75% intelligible, 7 out of every 10-ish. And then at 4, Copeland and Gleason said 100% intelligible. And then when we get to 2021, more recently, Hustad et al., they released some more data-driven normative data sets about working with children, and they found that it's really close to Copeland and Gleason's work, but it's 1 year later. So like it's 3, 4, and 5. So 5 should be about 90% intelligible. And then add that to what Catherine Crow and McLeod's work, where they looked at the norms in English. I think it was 2018 and 2020 or 2021. They came out with 2 articles, and they found that looking at previous studies, children when they're 5 years of age should have 90% of their speech sounds by that age. And then when they looked at 27 other languages, they found the same thing. That includes Spanish, Portuguese, it includes German, French, and many others, Jamaican Creole, these different languages that they found the same results. So by 5, majority of children should have 90% of their speech sounds in 28 different languages.
I'm just gonna, sorry, I'm gonna stop. Kiki, I'm gonna put in the websites for the resources. I'm looking those up, but I wanted to go back and for you to tell me that Simon, and where did you get the story about the cookie?
Yes, so Simon, it's SIMON, and it's evaluating communicative competence. And it's just 4 pictures, but it could be any pictures. You could do Frog, Where Are You? You can do your favorite picture book. And I will tell you all, if you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend Epic Books. It's epic.com or epicbooks.com. And I can help you, Carolyn, with some of these resources. I can type them in. Let's see here. So this one is Epic Books. It's a free resource. And so they have wonderful picture books, and many of the picture books are in English and Spanish also.
Oh, cool.
And so then you have just the very classic books that you get, the hardbacks that have the pages of like the living room and everything's labeled in English and Spanish, or playing outside, transportation, all these different things. And you can certainly use those in the evaluation as well. That's a great resource with an interpreter if needed, and that can help guide you. For our children who are severe, profound, highly unintelligible, a lot of times it's very challenging to tease out what's going on phonetically. If you ask them like, how was your day, or what did you do in school, or how was your weekend, and you get and then you're like, oh, that's awesome, totally not knowing what they said, right? We just make them feel good.
Right, yeah.
And so I tell people, just do the word level. It's okay to do word by word objects or pictures so that you know if the word is, for example, screwdriver, and you hear oo-ah or oo-ah-oh, all of a sudden now we know what's going on. We can tease out their phonological error patterns and really determine what we need to do for therapy. We know they're going to qualify as long as we do both languages and make sure that it's in both languages. But that's really important, and it's really powerful to have resources like that.
Let's talk a little bit more about working with interpreters.
Sure.
Because definitely for someone like me that is monolingual, what do I need? What do I need to, I don't know what I don't know. I need to know what I don't know, which is what do I need to tell, how do I work with an interpreter?
Yes, so it depends on the kind of interpreter that it is. We have trained interpreters that are available. Many school districts have access, or they have companies they work with to get interpreters into the schools for evaluations. I know in the hospital setting, sometimes they rely on, we have Zoom now. COVID showed this, so we could do a lot of different things. And so Zoom, telephone interpreters, we can get somebody to be there in person. It's always the best thing, to work with families. I think initially, the first questions that we are going to have is dialect, right?
Okay.
What's the dialect of that we need to be concerned with? Because some languages, the dialectal differences are more significant than others. In Spanish, there are dialectal differences, understand those differences and can converse with speakers of other dialects of Spanish. But I know, like in Hindi, for example, there are a vast number of dialectal differences, and some interpreters aren't able to interpret for other dialects of Hindi. So
Oh,
that's the
wow.
first question, making sure that there isn't any concern there. I think another thing would be to check to see if there are any cultural differences worth notating. As a male SLP, I always have to ask the question, for this particular background culture, when I'm working with a female family member, what is appropriate? Do I shake their hand? Do I need to wait at the table and not really engage? And so, like with Kurdish, for example, I did a Kurdish evaluation a while back, and I asked that question, and the interpreter said, who was female, she said, well, it's probably best if you just, as the mother comes in, stand and kind of nod and greet, and then go sit at the other end of the table on the other side. And that's probably the best thing you should do in that particular situation. And so I think asking those questions, and then this is the part that's always challenging, meeting with them like 10 minutes, 15 minutes before. Time is always an issue for all of us, but
Right.
getting that 10 minutes prior to the evaluation to let them know what you need. I think the other thing is we can't assume they know what we need them to know also,
Yeah.
right? And we're the experts.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, we're responsible for that eval and the quality of that eval. So we have to tell them, this is what I need you to do, and lay it out. I need you to tell me verbatim what the child's saying. I need you to make sure that if you're having any concerns, to let me know in terms of intelligibility and whatnot. And Sharyn McLeod has done some amazing work. I don't know how she does it all. She does such incredible stuff, and I love her to death as a colleague, somebody that works in the field, you know, because she's given us so much, a wealth of information. And she, on her website, or on her Charles Sturt University website, she has the intelligibility and context scale. I'm going to find that for you.
Oh, thank you. And I wanted, while you're doing that, there was a
Uh-huh.
question that did come in if we're going to multitask.
Sure.
Laura popped in, and she works with 0 to 3, and she has pediatricians that tell parents of children under 3 that it's okay to be late with first words if they are exposed to more than one language. But Laura's saying, I believe the more recent research shows that children learning languages simultaneously should still say their first words around 1 and combined words around 2. And she's asking if you have any specific bilingual resources that you could share so that she can
Sure.
share them with the professionals. So they're giving the right information to parents. So they're not waiting.
hmm I think that's a great point that is brought up, is that I think the milestones generally are that the milestones that we have in English generally are similar for our bilingual kiddos. I know Gildersleeve Newman et al., I think it was 2008, had a really nice article that came out showing how initially there is the perception of this delay, but over time, children catch up to their typically developing monolingual speaking peers. And so I will say that if a child's under 2 years of age, what I tell people is, if you've seen 1 2-year-old, you've seen 1 2-year-old, you know?
Right.
And so they're vastly different at 1 and 2. But I do think that I'm always in favor of early intervention and making sure that our kiddos are their needs are being met. That's why I tell people, even like we're moving into great frontier, I think, about targeting later developing sounds more early if we already have them in therapy. So like the R sound, for example,
Right.
if they're 3 and I have them in therapy for initial consonant deletion, other things that are critical for 3, and they're still having difficulty with the R sound, I'm going to target the R sound at 3, you know?
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So they don't
We
become
got him.
those,
Let's do it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that way you reduce the risk of them becoming the persistent speech sound disorders cases. And I work with middle school kids, and let me tell you, it is a wonderfully important but sometimes very challenging task.
Right.
teenagers, right? There's something else. You
They
get
are.
the I don't kelwa any moa about my awa sound kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Oh, that one gets me. Before I move us on to maybe some intervention or anything like that, but if we go back, because I think we're still going to attempt, maybe if I know we're going to, or actually we'll talk about informal, and I think that's where we'll go next. But this question is, how do we report or do we mention standard scores when we're conducting a standardized assessment, when we're using the help of an interpreter? How do we explain that in our report?
That is a great question. And I don't think that I have an answer that everybody agrees upon, honestly, in our profession. And that's okay. It's wonderful to have different opinions. I know colleagues and researchers who say do not report any standard scores, but I think that you can report them in certain cases. So like if I have a child who maybe didn't do as well in Spanish initially, but they're getting predominantly English immersion classes. They're not in a dual language program. For whatever reason, they missed ESOL, but they're doing well in English. And let's say their English scores came out at I do the self or something like that, one of the assessments, and their English scores come out like in 90, 95 range, right? That's a pretty amazing feat for a bilingual kid to get a 95 standard score when they're bilingual and the test is normed on monolingual English-speaking kids. So I'll put in there a little blurb. This test, of course, is normed on monolingual English-speaking children, but this bilingual child got a 95 standard score on it, which is fantastic, right? And so I think that it's very much case by case, and you certainly can report standard scores, but if it's going to cause the child to be penalized in any way, like let's say the score is lower and we want to look at more conceptual scoring, I think we have to get creative and smart about when we choose to report standard scores.
I just jumped into the chat when you mentioned about the R sound. We had a listener, and rightfully so, heard, well, if I'm going to qualify all 3-year-olds for R, no, we're not qualifying threes for
No,
R's, but if they're qualifying for other sounds, why
yes,
not work on that naturally as you would other sounds just for intelligibility?
yes,
Especially if,
great clarification point.
yes.
Yes, so if they just have the R sound, we're waiting. We're waiting until it's the right time to place them in services for just that R sound. But if we have them on for language goals, if they qualified for, they came out like severe in their phonological impairment, and we qualified them for that initial consonant deletion, final consonant deletion, the fronting, gliding, stopping, cluster reduction, a partridge in a pear tree, right?
Yeah,
We
yeah.
then if I already have them in services for those other things, why not stimulate the R? Why not get it going so that they're not waiting till later?
Oh, KK, no worries. Don't worry. I love that. We have another question. Hold on, if I got it. Angela, I hear you. We get a lot of referrals. And she's indicating she gets way too many referrals for second and third graders who parents speak only Spanish, but their child's Spanish skills have been nearly extinguished or haven't developed beyond the 2 to 3 year level due to total English immersion programs that
Right.
they're attending beginning they were put in at preschool. She's asking, what information or supports can I give parents that can prevent this from happening? And how can I support parents in continuing to help the student continue to develop their Spanish skills? That's what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Because the children can't communicate with their parents, and that breaks her heart. What breaks my heart too.
Yes, mine
Oh my
too.
gosh.
Mine too. In the school setting for school service, we're talking about public school services. We can't qualify them, unfortunately, for school services if their English scores come out in the average range and their Spanish scores are lower. We just can't. They have to have low scores in both in order for it to indicate that it is a language or speech disorder. And so in those cases, I provide resources, strategies that the families can do at home, encouraging native language interactions. If I can encourage, if they have access to technology, and looking for websites, getting creative about how we can get them resources where they can sit with their child and do those things. I've met bilingual professionals who say my parents forced me to learn Spanish and continue learning Spanish. Like they sat me down and said, in this house, you're only speaking Spanish. And then they say, and I'm grateful for that now as an adult. I didn't like it quite much back then, but as an adult, now I can speak both languages very well. So I appreciate my parents for doing that. I think it's okay to want your children to speak the native language. Of course it is. And we just have to get creative.
And I think also getting I think the point I'm coming away with, and I hope everybody else is that the value of two languages.
Mhm.
I wish I spoke another language, and and honoring, I guess, education that yes, your child, if and I think talking to those preschool teachers to make sure that they don't demystify it for them, and make sure that those preschool teachers know that they need to encourage the parents to continue to speak their native heritage language because it is part of their heritage, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
I know we've talked a lot about honoring the language and the assessment. Can we talk some about the evidence-based interventions?
Sure.
Bring us over. Yeah.
Yeah, so intervention is still a gray area. We don't have a lot in intervention, but we do have some great case study examples for different sound targets and different patterns to target and whatnot. I've done some work developing a cycles phonological remediation approach in Spanish and English. And then I'm starting to look at other languages as well to just come up with a roadmap. It may not be the exact thing that we need for each language, but coming up with something that we can utilize to help guide us in intervention. Um, shared sounds are really critical, and there are a few shared sounds that kind of transcend languages and go beyond and are in many languages. And I'm just going to let you know those are the stops, nasals, and glides. So we have P, the B, the M, the W, the T, the D, the K, and the G, and sometimes L. And there are going to be these beautiful accented varieties. And in the native language, in English, there might be some slight approximations where sometimes the sound is more palatal or just a different, kind of voice onset time. But for the most part, they're cognates. And so if we start with P, B, M, W, T, D, K, and G, and sometimes L, we can start tomorrow doing shared sounds first with children, with this notion from work by Paradis and many others that if we target it in English, it'll cross over to their native language. It'll generalize to their native language also. And so starting there, we have the bilingual approach, the shared sounds first, and then the cross-linguistic approach, we have unshared sounds in different languages. So for the monolingual SLP, for any SLP, working with a child who speaks a language that they don't speak themselves, we can start with shared sounds and then dovetail in the unshared English sounds and target the American R, for example. If we feel comfortable targeting, like for example, in Spanish, we can do the tapped R, the tapped flapped R. I call it the schwadi. And I always use like the reference shorty on the dance floor, schwadi on the dance floor kind of thing, because it's literally the sound and then a tapped kind of duh, udda, 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 udda. And you kind of go a little bit more quickly to make that tapped sound. And then I know I'm getting more into Spanish, but for the trilled R, something I always get asked, how do I do a trilled R? How do I get that to go? And I picked this up from a podcast in Spain. I can't recall the professor of linguistics who talked about it. But what you do for the trilled R is you place your tongue where on the alveolar ridge where you make the dental sounds, and then you blow the H sound or air through it to get that very nice, trilled R sound. And it's the Bernoulli effect that we learned from voice that causes the tongue to be set into vibration to create that trilled sound. And so just some tips that we can all learn to trill our R's.
I can't. I
Well,
have
maybe
tried.
now with that explanation, Carolyn, maybe
Not
we
with
can
that
get you to
attitude,
start
Carolyn,
trilling.
you can't.
That's right. Wait, you need to add I can't yet. You have
Yes.
that fixed mindset.
Thank you. I know, right?
The
Not with that
growth
attitude.
mindset. Yeah.
You're right. I am actually going to practice that. I'm going to keep tongue on alveolar ridge, blow out with the H. I'm going to
And
try,
keep
not right
sending
now.
the, you have to keep sending the air through it. Yeah.
Okay, okay, okay. I love it.
And then report back.
I will, believe me, I will. But when we're talking, is it appropriate for an SLP like me to do a trill when I can't do a trill?
Well, you can, if you can do a trill and you can practice that motion and explain it to the child, you certainly can get them to do it. In intervention, now, if it's an assessment, obviously a bilingual SLP or interpreter, coming in and helping, that we, assessment, we do need to leave to the bilingual experts for sure. But intervention, I mean, how can we have a bilingual person in every intervention for
No,
every child in
right.
America? There's no way, right? And so we have to get creative. And so Gina Glover, who's an SLP out of Fort Worth, I loved hearing her talk at the Texas Speech Language Hearing Association several times. And she adapts ESL materials in reverse. So she labels her room in Spanish, working with her kids, and Vietnamese, because they have Vietnamese Spanish dual language in the Fort Worth area as well, to help her. She also talks about having an ambassador, she calls them, where it can be either another speech kiddo who's maybe older, fourth grader, fifth grader, who has very little goals left, but they speak both languages really well. They can sit in grouped together at the same time with a younger child and serve as that sort of like quasi-interpreter with parent permission, teacher permission, administrative permission. She also goes outside of speech and she posts like a job opportunity for that really amazing fifth or sixth grader at the school who can potentially serve as an ambassador, come into the speech room. Again, consent from everybody involved, the parents of the child receiving speech, they have to give consent. Teachers finding the flex time, of course, not during core classes, but they can
Sure.
come in and also help with that. And the beautiful thing about that is it helps bilingual children realize the true gift that they have, that they can share with other bilinguals, and it gives them a sense of pride.
That is beautiful. That is
Yeah.
beautiful because, oh my gosh. And I love the fact that you said put a job opportunity out there.
Mhm. She
And what,
posts it, and yeah, and she in her stories that she tells, that I've heard her tell before, they come dressed up in their finest. The girls come in these beautiful dresses for the interviews, and they take the interviews very seriously. I mean, it's the cutest thing. The boys in their cowboy boots and Wranglers and their nice
uh-huh.
button-up shirts. It's so great.
What a wonderful way to involve the community.
Hmm.
And especially, well, in Texas, definitely getting the Spanish speakers and definitely Vietnamese. We had a lot of Vietnamese. I was in Saifair. I'm just thinking about wherever we are in the nation, we're all over the place on this podcast, thinking about what is one of the languages that might be unique to your area, and then having that job opportunity to really bolster that the school relationship with the community. And that I'm assuming that that job is not just for students in special ed. That's general ed students. I mean, this opens up the door to everyone,
Right, right,
and
exactly. Mhm.
oh my gosh, and what a wonderful experience for all students. And really, so, oh, Angela thinks, she said she loves that idea. I think we all love that idea. That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
I've found it to be very helpful for sure. And so I'm very grateful for Gina Glover providing us with that idea, because she's done a lot of great work, like I said, in Texas. And we have a lot of great researchers and collaborators and professionals all over the country, all over the world, that we can collaborate with. Listservs, online social media platforms where people ask great questions and we all help each other. And the greats are on there. Lisbenia is on there. Bador is on there. They're on these listservs providing wonderful information to our community of SLPs. And so it's wonderful. It's great.
Where, when you say listserv, what are you referring
Oh,
to?
like the ASHA listservs, the
Oh, gotcha,
SIGs,
gotcha. Yes.
yes, the emails that we get, and then on like the social media platforms, they have the groups where you can join
Of
and you can
course.
kind of
Yeah.
follow along with the questions and stuff. Yes, yeah,
Mhm. Sorry. Yeah. I think I had a moment where I just zoned out and I didn't even make that connection. Sorry. Yeah. I mean,
that's
we've
okay.
got social media is our friend. It's our downfall too, but it is our friend, and use it and reach out. I love it. Oh,
Another resource.
thank you. Speech
Yes,
Accent Archive. For those
yes.
that will be just listening, Speech Accent Archive. Thank you for that.
And if you type that in, it'll come right up, and it's this database that has several languages listed. And the beautiful thing about it is they have recorded native speakers of several different languages reciting the Stella passage in English. And
Oh,
they give the passage, they give the phonetic transcription of the speaker, and you can listen to the speaker. So if you ever get those questions from teachers that are like, I don't understand this kid, or they're different, they're doing something, I don't know what it is, and it's a difference, you
mhm.
can go to the Speech Accent Archive and you can look for your language, find a recording, and they even have the region where the speaker's from that country.
Oh,
And
wow.
so if the family is originally from a particular region or location, you can localize to that region, pull up the recording, play it, and hear a native speaker with beautiful accented English, reciting the Stella passage to show that, you know what, this child sounds just like this other native speaker speaking English. There's no concern. There shouldn't be a concern.
Janelle, yes, Speech Accent Archives.
Archive. Let me look for that link because I know I can pull it up really quickly.
Perfect. That just sounds amazing because I think we also want to make sure that we're not getting over referred and do some education for our staff to know when it is just a difference and not a disorder in speech sounds. Yeah. Oh,
Yes.
Thank you for popping that
Yeah,
up.
so I put the link on there, but for those listening, yes, if you just type in Speech Accent Archive, it'll pop right up on Google.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, I cannot believe, and I am so sad that we have come to the end. And I cannot thank you enough. I have so many more questions to ask. Like, I would love to have you back on if you would be willing to come back on. I would love for you to maybe even walk through like a whole eval on how you would do it. I think that would be powerful for us if I think those out there would agree. Yeah, Angela's like, yes, more. Yeah, I agree. We want more.
I
As
would love to. Yes, I would love to do that. That'd be wonderful.
I would love it. I'd love it. Oh, everyone's agreeing. See, everyone, your hands are tied now. Your hands are
I
tied
know.
now.
I've just committed myself to another podcast with you, which is
All
great.
right. I love it. Well, I'm going to get you on the books as soon as we're done here tonight. But before we say goodbye, I just want to thank you so much for your time. Obviously, you are a wealth of knowledge. Hearts are flying from all over the place. Thanks for those of you that are listening. I feel better. And one thing I want to walk away with is when you told us that to not give ourselves some grace. We are all doing the best we can. I love that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. Mhm.
All right. But oh my gosh, Raul, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. And yes, as soon as we get off here, I'm going to be emailing you and we are getting you back on the books because we need you.
Sounds
Okay.
wonderful. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Carolyn, and thanks
Thank
to
you.
everyone who participated. I really appreciate your input.
Yeah, thanks everyone. All right, bye guys.
Thanks for joining us on today's podcast. Remember to go to speechtherapypd.com to learn more about earning ASHA CEUs. We appreciate your positive reviews and support and would love for you to write a quick review and subscribe. If you have indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete address in your account profile prior to the course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to be reflected on your ASHA transcript. For our School of Speech listeners, we have a special coupon code to receive $20 off any annual subscription to speechtherapypd.com. Head over there to get ASHA CEUs for listening to this podcast and all other episodes. The code is SCHOOL20. That is SCHOOL20. Hope to see you on our next episode. Also, please don't hesitate to tell us which topics you would like us to cover in future episodes. To get in touch, drop us a line in the comment section or send us a message on social media.